I'm Maxwell, 35, the youngest of 4 siblings. My older sister Victoria is 42, Isabella is 40, and Lawrence is 38. Throughout our lives, they've made it clear they considered me beneath them. When Victoria got married, I wasn't invited. When Isabella tied the knot, same story. Lawrence's wedding? Not welcome there either. Now I'm engaged to Hannah, the love of my life. But when they discovered they weren't invited to mine, what happened next changed everything we thought we knew about family. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever dealt with family drama, hit that like button and subscribe to show you're part of our community. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for how this all unfolds. Growing up as the 4th child in my family was like being an afterthought. My parents, Richard and Patricia, never explicitly said it, but their actions made it clear. Victoria, Isabella, and Lawrence were the children they planned for, and I was the surprise that came along 6 years after Lawrence when they thought their family was complete. Victoria was always the golden child. From an early age, she showed academic promise, bringing home perfect report cards that went straight to the refrigerator door. By the time I was old enough to understand family dynamics, she was already on her way to medical school, making our parents beam with pride at every family gathering. "Our daughter, the doctor," they'd say, while I sat quietly coloring in the corner. Isabella wasn't far behind in the favorite child race. She had a natural talent for debate that eventually led her to law school. I remember sitting through countless dinners where the conversation revolved around her mock trial victories or internship at prestigious law firms. When I tried to show my parents a drawing I was particularly proud of, my father would pat my head absently and say, "That's nice, Maxwell. Now, Isabella, tell us more about that case you're working on." Lawrence completed the perfect family picture my parents had envisioned. The business prodigy who could calculate profit margins before he was out of high school. He followed our father into finance and was being groomed to take over the family investment firm from an early age. Then there was me. By the time I came along, my parents had used up all their ambitious energy on my siblings. While they attended every science fair, debate tournament, and business competition for my older siblings, my art shows were often met with, "Sorry, Maxwell, your mother is tired from Victoria's medical school graduation." Or, "Your father needs to help Lawrence prepare for his internship interview." I vividly remember my sophomore year of high school when I won first place in a statewide art competition. The ceremony was on a Thursday evening, and I had reminded my parents for weeks. When the night came, I sat alone in the auditorium, watching other kids receive their awards with their beaming parents taking photos. My name was called, and the applause felt hollow as I walked across the stage alone. Later that night, I discovered my family had attended Victoria's white coat ceremony instead, something they had, forgotten, conflicted with my event. Our family photos told the story without words. The formal portrait hanging in our living room featured Victoria, Isabella, and Lawrence clustered around our parents, while I stood slightly apart, as if I had been added as an afterthought. In casual photos from family vacations, I was often the one taking the picture rather than in it. I tried everything to gain their approval. I took business classes in high school to connect with Lawrence and my father. I joined the debate club to have something in common with Isabella. I even considered pre-med courses to please my mother, who constantly spoke of having 2 doctors in the family, looking at Victoria and then pointedly not at me. But my heart was never in these pursuits, and my mediocre performance only seemed to confirm their belief that I lacked the family drive. Art was my refuge. In the quiet of my room, with just a sketch pad and pencils, I could create worlds where I belong. My art teacher, Mrs. Collins, was the first adult who seemed to truly see me. "You have a gift, Maxwell," she would say. "Your perspective is unique because of, not despite, your experiences." Those words became a lifeline during family dinners where I felt invisible. When it came time for college applications, my siblings had all attended prestigious Ivy League schools. My parents had started college funds for each of them, making frequent references to the importance of setting aside money for Quality education. When I asked about my college fund, my mother looked surprised. Oh, Maxwell, you know how expenses add up. Victoria's medical school wasn't cheap, and Isabella's law school, well, we assumed you'd go to State University. It's perfectly adequate for an art degree. I left for college with 2 suitcases and barely enough money for first semester's books. My mother hugged me briefly at the drop-off, already talking on her phone about Lawrence's MBA application as she walked back to the car. My father simply patted my shoulder and said, "Try to find something practical to fall back on. Not everyone can make it as an artist." That day, watching their car drive away without a backward glance, something shifted inside me. For the first time, I realized that no amount of achievement would ever make me equal in their eyes. I was not, and never would be, part of the golden trinity of Victoria, Isabella, and Lawrence. 7 years ago, Victoria called with what she termed exciting news. She was engaged to Thomas, a fellow doctor she'd met during her residency. I genuinely felt happy for her. Despite our differences, she was still my sister, and I wanted her to be happy. "That's fantastic, Victoria!" "Congratulations," I said, actually excited at the prospect of being involved in a significant family event. "I'd love to help with whatever you need for the wedding." There was a pause on the line. "About that, Maxwell," she said, her voice taking on that clinical tone she used when delivering difficult news. "Thomas and I are planning a very intimate ceremony. Just immediate family and close colleagues." "Right," I said, confused. "So when should I block off my calendar?" Another pause, longer this time. "Well, the thing is, we're trying to keep the guest list manageable. Mom and Dad will be there, of course, and Isabella and Lawrence." The realization hit me like a physical blow. "But not me? I'm not invited to my own sister's wedding?" "It's not personal," Victoria said, though everything about this felt intensely personal. "We just want a certain atmosphere, you know? Professional connections are important in our field, and we need to make room for key people. I'm sure you understand." I didn't understand. Not at all. But I swallowed my hurt and said, "If that's what you want, it's your day." When I called my parents to ask if they knew about this decision, my mother sighed as if I was being difficult. "Victoria has her reasons, Maxwell. It's her special day, and she gets to decide who attends. Please don't make this about you." But it wasn't about me. It was about being erased from what it meant to be immediate family. Still, I tried to maintain a relationship with Victoria. I sent a wedding gift, an original painting I'd created of the Boston skyline where she and Thomas had met. She sent a generic thank you card that could have been addressed to anyone. 2 years later, Isabella announced her engagement to Alexander, a fellow attorney. Given what had happened with Victoria's wedding, I was prepared for the possibility of another exclusion, but hoped my sister might make a different choice. My hope was misplaced. Isabella didn't even call to tell me herself. I learned I wasn't invited when my mother mentioned casually during the phone call. The wedding planner is asking about dietary restrictions for the family table. Just check if Dad is still avoiding shellfish. Should I let them know about my restrictions too? I asked, knowing full well what the answer would be. "Oh, Maxwell," my mother said, her voice tinged with annoyance. "You know you're not on the guest list. Isabella is keeping it small. Just the family and some important partners from the firm." Just the family. Not including me. The rift was growing wider. At Thanksgiving that year, Victoria talked at length about her perfect wedding day, showing photos that highlighted my absence. Isabella discussed her upcoming nuptials, addressing questions about the venue and catering to everyone at the table except me. I sat silently, pushing food around my plate, feeling like a ghost at my own family gathering. By the time Lawrence got engaged to Rebecca 3 years ago, I didn't even expect an invitation. True to form, none came. What hurt more than the exclusion was the assumption, the fact that no one, not Lawrence, not my parents, not even Rebecca, whom I had only met twice, thought it strange enough to acknowledge or explain. My absence had become the expected norm. After Lawrence's wedding, I saw the photos on social media, my entire family gathered together, smiling widely, no empty space indicating someone was missing. Comments from relatives read, "Beautiful family picture," and "the whole crew together," as if I had never existed at all. Family gatherings became exercises in emotional endurance. My siblings would reminisce about their wedding days, sharing inside jokes about incidents I wasn't present for. My parents would join in, seemingly oblivious to how these conversations excluded me. "Remember when Uncle Frank gave that hilariously inappropriate toast at Victoria's reception?" Lawrence would say, and everyone would burst into laughter. "Or when the best man dropped the rings at Isabella's ceremony?" My father would add, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. I would sit there, smiling politely, unable to contribute, feeling increasingly like an interloper in my own family. When I would try to change the subject, Victoria would give me that look, the one that said I was being socially awkward again. "Maxwell never did have a sense for appropriate conversation," she'd say to whoever was nearby, not quite under her breath. After one particularly painful Christmas dinner where the conversation had revolved almost exclusively around Lawrence and Rebecca's wedding for over an hour, I excused myself to get some air. Standing on my parents' porch, watching my breath form clouds in the cold night air, I made a decision. I would stop seeking approval or inclusion from people who had made it clear I was an afterthought. I would build my own life, on my own terms, and find people who actually wanted me around. It was both terrifying and liberating to acknowledge that my family might never see me as an equal member. But once I admitted this truth to myself, I could stop banging my head against the wall expecting a different result. I could start healing. After that Christmas, I made a clean break. I accepted a job offer in Seattle, about as far as I could get from my family in Boston without leaving the continental United States. The physical distance created space for me to breathe and discover who I was outside of being the disappointing youngest sibling. Seattle's vibrant art scene welcomed me in a way my family never had. I rented a tiny studio apartment and a separate art space in a collective downtown. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, people who understood the drive to create, who valued expression over conformity, passion over practicality. 6 months after my move, I was showcasing some of my work at a small gallery opening when Hannah walked in. She stood in front of my largest piece, an abstract representation of family dynamics with 4 distinct shapes, 3 clustered together, and 1 set apart, for nearly 20 minutes. When she finally turned and saw me watching her, she smiled. "The artist himself," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Hannah. This piece, it's speaking to me. The isolation of the 4th element, yet there's something hopeful about the way the light catches it, isn't there? Like it's found its own source of illumination." No one had ever read my work so accurately before. I was speechless for a moment, then managed to say, "That's exactly what I was trying to convey. I'm Maxwell." We talked until the gallery closed, then continued over coffee, then dinner. Hannah was a children's book illustrator who understood both the practical struggles and the soul-deep necessity of creative work. She didn't ask about my family that first night, but when the topic eventually came up, she listened without judgment, without the implication that I must have done something to deserve my treatment. "Family should lift you up, not diminish you," she said simply. Having someone believe in me was a new experience. When I doubted whether to submit work to a competitive exhibition, Hannah was the one who packaged my pieces and drove me to the drop-off point. When I was offered my first major commission but panicked about whether I could deliver, she sat with me through the night, helping me work through concepts until I found my confidence. I also found support in unexpected places. My cousin Andrea, my mother's sister's daughter, reached out after seeing my work featured in an arts magazine. Unlike the rest of the family, she acknowledged the elephant in the room. "I never thought it was right, the way they excluded you," she said during our first phone call. "I wanted to say something at Lawrence's wedding, but no one wants to rock the boat," I finished for her. It was the unspoken family rule: maintain the appearance of perfection at all costs. Andrea became my bridge to the family, keeping me updated without forcing me to engage directly. Through her, I learned that Victoria's perfect marriage was showing cracks, that Isabella was working 70-hour weeks and barely saw Alexander, that Lawrence was drowning in the pressure of taking over the family business. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, only a sad recognition that the perfect lives they'd constructed were as fragile as they were exclusive. My own life, meanwhile, was blossoming in ways I never expected. I started therapy, unpacking years of subtle diminishment and learning to recognize my own worth. My therapist, Dr. Reynolds, helped me understand that my family's treatment wasn't a reflection of my value but of their limitations. Some families, he explained, create rigid roles for their members. Your siblings were cast as the successful ones, and unfortunately, that meant someone had to be cast as the disappointment. That says nothing about your actual worth or potential. Professionally, things were taking off. A series of my urban landscape pieces caught the attention of a major corporate client who commissioned works for their offices nationwide. The check from that single contract was more than I'd earned in the previous 2 years combined. For the first time, I was not just financially stable but successful by any objective measure. I called my parents to share the news, hoping perhaps this tangible success might finally register. My father's response was telling. "That's nice, Maxwell. Did you hear Victoria's department received a major research grant? $5 million. Now that's impressive." At some point I stopped measuring my worth by their yardstick. My success wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about building a life that felt authentic and fulfilling to me. Hannah and I moved in together after a year of dating. We created a home filled with art and books and friends who dropped by unannounced because they actually wanted to spend time with us. On our second anniversary, Hannah and I were having a picnic in Discovery Park, overlooking Puget Sound. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows, and I was sketching her profile against the backdrop of the Olympic Mountains when she turned to me. "Have you ever thought about getting married?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. Marriage, in my experience, was an institution that excluded and divided rather than united. I had to be honest with her. "I have complicated feelings about it," I admitted. "In my family, weddings became weapons." Hannah took my hand. "What if we reclaimed it? Made it something healing instead of harmful?" I looked at this woman who had loved me at my most broken and celebrated me at my strongest. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like that very much." 2 weeks later, I proposed to her in the same gallery where we met. The owner, who had become a friend, let me set up an exhibition of pieces that told the story of our relationship. The final piece was a small, intimate portrait of Hannah, beside which I placed the ring and waited. When she saw it, tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she said before I could even ask the question. "1,000 times yes." That night, as we celebrated with friends, I felt a momentary shadow pass over my joy. Would my family find a way to diminish this too? Then I looked around at the people who had chosen to love me, at Hannah who had agreed to build a life with me, and I realized I was already surrounded by all the family I needed. Hannah and I set a date for June 15th, giving us about 10 months to plan. We agreed on a relatively small ceremony at a sculpture garden just outside the city, a place where art and nature intertwined in a way that felt representative of our relationship. As we sat at our kitchen table one evening, working on the preliminary guest list, Hannah noticed my hesitation when we got to the family section. "Talk to me," she said gently. "What's going through your mind right now?" I stared at the blank space under family of the groom, and felt a tangle of emotions I couldn't immediately sort through. "I don't know if I want to invite them," I finally admitted. "My parents, my siblings. I don't know if I want them there." Hannah didn't rush to reassure me or push me in either direction. "That's a valid feeling," she said. "What are you afraid might happen if they come?" I thought about it. That they'll find a way to make it about them. That they'll judge everything and everyone. That I'll spend my wedding day feeling the way I've felt at every family gathering, like I don't quite measure up. And if they don't come? I might regret not giving them one more chance. I might wonder if this was the moment they would have finally seen me. I sighed. But I also might feel free. Hannah suggested I discuss it with Dr. Reynolds before making a final decision. In our next session, I laid out the dilemma. Maxwell, he said after listening carefully, weddings are significant not just as celebrations but as statements about who we include in our most intimate moments. Your siblings made a clear statement when they excluded you from theirs. What statement do you want to make with yours? I want it to be honest, I said. I want to be surrounded by people who truly want to be there, who are happy for us without qualification. And do you believe your family fits that description? I thought about how my mother had responded when I called to tell her about my engagement. Oh, she had said, sounding distracted. Well, Hannah seems nice from what you've said. Did you hear Isabella might be made partner at her firm? No, I admitted. I don't think they do. Over the following weeks, Hannah and I continued to discuss the decision. She made it clear that while she supported whatever I chose, she wanted our wedding day to be joyful, not stressful. This is about us creating a foundation for our marriage, she said. Not about healing your past. That's important work, but it's separate. I knew she was right. After much reflection, I made the difficult call to my parents. My father answered, and I could hear a golf game playing in the background. Dad, I need to talk to you and Mom about something important. It's about the wedding. Hold on, he said, and I heard him call for my mother to pick up the extension. Neither of them muted the TV. We're both here, my mother said. Is everything okay with the arrangements? Do you need help with the costs? We helped Victoria with her band, you know. No, we're fine financially, I said, taking a deep breath. I'm calling because Hannah and I have made a decision about the guest list. We've decided to keep it very small, just the people who have been supportive of our relationship and actively present in our lives. There was a pause. What exactly are you saying, Maxwell? My father asked, his tone sharpening. I'm saying that I'm not inviting Victoria, Isabella, or Lawrence to the wedding. And I wanted to let you know directly so you could decide if you still want to attend under those circumstances. The explosion was immediate. My mother gasped as if I'd physically struck her. My father's voice rose to a volume I rarely heard from him. What do you mean, not inviting your siblings? That's absurd. They're your family. None of them invited me to their weddings, I reminded him, fighting to keep my voice steady. Not one. That was different, my mother insisted. Their situations were different. How? How was it different? Maxwell, you're being childish. This is obviously some sort of revenge. It's not revenge, I said firmly. It's a boundary. I'm inviting the people who have shown they value their relationship with me. That doesn't include Victoria, Isabella, or Lawrence. The conversation deteriorated from there. My parents cycled through anger, guilt trips, and finally threats. If your siblings aren't welcome, then we won't be attending either, my father declared. Think about what you're doing to this family. After I hung up, I sat on our couch feeling shaky but oddly peaceful. Hannah sat beside me, taking my hand. How do you feel? She asked. Like I just set down something very heavy that I've been carrying for a long time. The following weeks brought a barrage of communications. Victoria called, her voice cold with fury. How dare you use your wedding to try to punish us for perceived slights from years ago? Isabella sent a lengthy email justifying their past decisions. Our weddings were professional networking events as much as personal celebrations, she wrote. Your current career status wouldn't have fit the milieu we were trying to create. It wasn't personal. Lawrence, surprisingly, showed up at our apartment one evening. This is going too far, he said, standing awkwardly in our living room, looking out of place in his expensive suit. You're upsetting everyone. Just invite them and smooth things over. Why? I asked simply. Why is it so important to you now, when it wasn't important to any of you then? He didn't have an answer for that. The siblings tried another approach, going through Hannah. Victoria called her directly, introducing herself as Maxwell's sister, who he may have mentioned. Hannah later told me Victoria had tried to paint me as emotionally unstable, suggesting Hannah should help me see reason for my own good. I told her I trust your judgment completely, Hannah said, and that someone should have stood up for you years ago. My parents made their final play, informing me they would not attend without all their children present. We refused to participate in dividing the family, my mother said, as if the division hadn't happened long ago. Throughout this storm, I remained calm, though not without moments of doubt. Was I making a mistake? Would I regret this hardline stance years from now? But every time I pictured my siblings at our wedding, I could see them huddled together, exchanging glances, making the day about their discomfort rather than our joy. Andrea called to offer support. For what it's worth, she said, I think you're making the right call. They're scrambling because you're not following the script anymore. Hannah's family, in contrast to mine, was a picture of healthy boundaries and respect. Her parents, Michael and Susan, never once questioned our decision. It's your day, Susan said when Hannah explained the situation. You invite whoever makes your hearts happy. As our wedding day approached, the guest list was finalized. 68 people who genuinely cared about us would be present. My parents and siblings would not be among them. The night before we sent out invitations, Hannah asked one more time if I was sure. I looked at our list: friends who had supported my art when no one else would, colleagues who had become chosen family, Hannah's wonderfully normal relatives who treated me with more warmth than my own family ever had. I'm sure, I said. For once, I'm choosing my own happiness. The formal invitations went out on a Tuesday. By Wednesday evening, my phone was blowing up. Victoria was the first to call, her voice tightly controlled but vibrating with anger. So it's official then? You're really going through with this childish exclusion? It's not childish, Victoria. It's a choice, just like the choice you made about your wedding. That was completely different. We were just starting our careers, making important connections. You weren't in a place professionally where you would have fit in. The brutal honesty of her statement hung between us. After a moment I replied, Thank you for being honest. Now I'm being honest too. I want people at my wedding who value me regardless of my professional place. Victoria's voice rose. You're making Mom cry every night. Dad is beside himself. Is that what you wanted? No. What I wanted was to be treated like part of the family for the past 35 years. But we don't always get what we want, do we? After Victoria, Isabella reached out via email, true to her methodical nature. The message was 5 paragraphs long, each carefully arguing why my decision was illogical, disproportionate, and ultimately harmful to everyone involved, including myself. While I understand you may have felt excluded from our celebrations, she wrote, it's important to recognize the different circumstances and social contexts involved. My wedding to Alexander included numerous law partners whose connections were essential to my career advancement. The intimate nature of the ceremony necessitated difficult decisions about the guest list based on professional considerations. I replied with a single sentence. My wedding also necessitates difficult decisions about the guest list based on personal considerations. Lawrence's approach was the most surprising. He showed up at our door on a Saturday morning, looking unusually disheveled. Can I come in? He asked, and I stepped aside to let him enter. He paced our living room, running his hands through his hair. Look, Maxwell, I get that you're upset about the past. But this is causing chaos in the family. Mom is threatening not to come to Thanksgiving if we're all fighting. Dad is talking about changing his will to reflect those who value family unity. Is that what you want? I sat on the couch, watching my usually composed brother unravel. What I want is to enjoy my wedding day without feeling like an outsider in my own celebration. Why is that so hard for everyone to understand? Because it looks like revenge. You're deliberately hurting them to get back at us. No, Lawrence. I'm protecting myself from people who have consistently made me feel unwelcome and inadequate. There's a difference. He stopped pacing and looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. You really believe that, don't you? That we've made you feel that way? You have. All of you. For as long as I can remember. Lawrence left without resolving anything, but something in his expression had shifted. It wasn't understanding, exactly, but perhaps the first crack in the family narrative where I was always wrong, always difficult, always less than. The siblings' next tactic was to divide Hannah and me. Victoria called Hannah directly, introducing herself warmly as if they were already friends. "I'm so sorry we're meeting under these circumstances," she said. "I just wanted you to understand the family dynamics you're marrying into. Maxwell has always been sensitive, always felt he had something to prove. This wedding situation is just another example of how he creates drama when he feels overlooked." Hannah, bless her, saw through this immediately. "Actually," she replied, "from everything I've observed and everything Maxwell has shared, he's been remarkably patient with a family that consistently diminishes his worth. I support his decision completely." Isabella tried a different approach, sending Hannah a lengthy email detailing my history of emotional reactions, and suggesting, as a future spouse, she might want to encourage more mature conflict resolution strategies. Hannah showed me the email, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. Do they really not see what they're doing? Even now? Lawrence went so far as to visit Hannah at her studio when I wasn't there. He brought coffee and pastries, as if it were a casual social call, and spent an hour trying to convince her that she should use her influence to change my mind, for the sake of family peace. Hannah recounted this to me later, still fuming. He kept talking about when the dust settles and after the drama dies down, as if your legitimate feelings were just some temporary tantrum they needed to wait out. The pressure wasn't limited to my immediate family. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely spoke to suddenly had opinions about our guest list. My mother's sister called to tell me I was breaking your mother's heart over petty grievances. My father's brother emailed to remind me that family is family, no matter what. Andrea remained my sole ally in the extended family. They're all acting like this is coming out of nowhere, she said during one of our calls. As if there wasn't a pattern established long before you made this decision. Through all of this, Hannah was my rock. She never wavered in her support, never suggested I compromise to make things easier. This is about us starting our marriage with honesty and health, she reminded me. Not about appeasing people who haven't earned a place in our celebration. The lowest point came about 2 months before the wedding. My parents insisted on a family dinner to clear the air. Against my better judgment, I agreed, hoping perhaps there could be some resolution. Hannah came with me for support. The dinner was at my parents' house, a place that had never felt like home to me. Victoria, Isabella, and Lawrence were already there when we arrived, seated together on one side of the dining table like a panel of judges. My parents took the heads of the table, leaving Hannah and me to sit opposite my siblings. We wanted to have this conversation in person, my mother began, because clearly there have been misunderstandings. What followed was 2 hours of what they called clearing the air, but was actually a coordinated attack on my character, my choices, and my perception of our family history. You've always been overly sensitive, Victoria said. You've always needed to make everything about you, Isabella added. You've never understood the pressures the rest of us were under, Lawrence concluded. My parents nodded along, occasionally adding their own observations about my difficult nature and tendency to hold grudges. Hannah squeezed my hand under the table as I sat in silence, letting the familiar patterns play out. When they finally ran out of steam, I spoke quietly. Thank you all for making my decision so much easier. If there was any doubt in my mind about whether you should be at our wedding, it's gone now. We left to protests and accusations of being dramatic and disrespectful. In the car, Hannah held my shaking hands. I'm so sorry, she said. I had no idea it was that bad. That's actually a relatively good family dinner by our standards, I replied, trying to smile through the hurt. The next day, my parents called to say they had made their final decision. They would not be attending the wedding without all their children present. We hope someday you'll understand why we had to take this stand, my father said. I hung up feeling a strange mixture of pain and liberation. Our wedding would have no blood relatives from my side present. But it would also be free from the tension, judgment, and subtle put-downs that had characterized every family gathering of my life. Are you okay? Hannah asked when I told her. I thought about it honestly, then nodded. I think I am. For the first time, I'm not trying to fit into a space they created for me. I'm creating my own space, on my own terms. We proceeded with our plans. The sculpture garden was booked. The caterer was finalized. Hannah found a dress that made her look like a woodland goddess. I commissioned a friend to create our rings, simple bands with a hidden design that symbolized our journey together. As the day approached, I felt lighter than I expected. There was sadness, yes, a mourning for the family I wished I had. But there was also a profound sense of rightness, of choosing health over history, of refusing to perpetuate patterns that had caused so much pain. The morning of our wedding dawned clear and bright, Seattle's notoriously fickle weather cooperating for once. I woke early, watching dawn light filter through our bedroom curtains, my mind surprisingly calm despite the significance of the day. Hannah had stayed with her parents at a nearby hotel, following the tradition of not seeing each other before the ceremony. In the quiet apartment, I made coffee and sat on our small balcony, taking a moment to center myself before the day began. My phone pinged with a text message. I expected it to be from one of my groomsmen, but instead saw my mother's name. My heart rate quickened as I opened it. Your father and I have been talking. We've decided to attend today, just the two of us. The others know and understand. We may not agree with all your choices, but we don't want to miss our son's wedding. If that's still okay with you. I stared at the message, emotions tumbling through me. After weeks of ultimatums and pressure, this sudden reversal was disorienting. I called Hannah. My parents want to come, I said when she answered. Without my siblings. They're asking if it's still okay. What do you want? Hannah asked, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. I thought about it. I think I want them there. Not because I need their approval anymore, but because I'm proud of the life I've built. I want them to see it. Then tell them yes. I texted back. Yes, you're welcome to come. Ceremony is at 4 p.m. My mother replied with a simple, thank you. We'll be there. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of preparations. My best friend Oliver arrived to help me get ready, bringing breakfast and steady conversation that kept me from overthinking the day ahead. By the time we arrived at the sculpture garden to help with final setups, I was feeling grounded and present. As guests began to arrive, I stationed myself near the entrance with Oliver, greeting friends and Hannah's family members. Then I saw them, my parents walking tentatively up the path, dressed formally but looking somehow smaller than I remembered. They came, Oliver murmured beside me. I nodded, excusing myself to meet them. We stood awkwardly for a moment before my mother stepped forward and embraced me briefly. The garden is beautiful, she said. Very artistic. From her, this was high praise. My father shook my hand, his grip firm but his eyes uncertain. Thank you for coming, I said simply. We wouldn't miss it, my father replied, though we all knew that just yesterday, they had been prepared to do exactly that. As I showed them to their seats, I noticed a commotion at the garden entrance. Andrea was there, along with her husband and children, and behind them, my stomach dropped, were three more familiar figures. Victoria, Isabella, and Lawrence stood uncertainly at the perimeter, not entering but clearly visible. Andrea hurried over to me. I'm so sorry, she said quickly. They followed us here. I told them they weren't invited, but they insisted on at least seeing the venue. I can ask them to leave. I looked over at my siblings, who weren't making any move to enter but seemed to be waiting for something, permission, perhaps, or confirmation of rejection. In that moment, they looked less like the intimidating figures of my childhood and more like what they were, people uncomfortable with a situation outside their control. "It's okay," I told Andrea. "They can stay for the ceremony if they want to. As guests, not as the family of the groom. Just make sure they understand that distinction." Andrea nodded and went to convey my message. I watched as she spoke to them, saw their expressions shift from expectation to surprise. After a brief discussion, they nodded and followed her to seats at the very back of the gathering. Oliver appeared at my elbow. "You sure about this?" "No," I admitted. "But I'm not going to let them disrupt today either way." The ceremony itself was everything Hannah and I had hoped for. The weather held, sunshine filtering through the garden's trees to create dappled light across the assembled guests. When Hannah appeared at the end of the aisle, escorted by her father, the world narrowed to just her, radiant, confident, and looking at me with such love that everything else faded into background noise. Our vows were personal, written by each of us in private and revealed only in that moment. Hannah spoke of finding unexpected joy, of building a partnership based on mutual respect and growth. I spoke of learning what family truly meant, of choosing love over obligation, of the freedom that comes with being fully seen and accepted. As we exchanged rings, I caught a glimpse of my mother wiping away tears. Not the performative tears she sometimes produced at family gatherings, but quiet, genuine emotion. My father sat beside her, his expression uncharacteristically soft. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour that preceded dinner, Andrea approached with news. "Victoria, Isabella, and Lawrence asked me to tell you they're leaving. They said to congratulate you and—" She hesitated. "And they said they understand a bit better now. Whatever that means." I nodded, surprised to feel a twinge of something like regret. Not strong enough to make me chase after them, but enough to acknowledge that something had shifted. The reception was filled with joy, laughter, and genuine celebration. My parents sat somewhat awkwardly at first, clearly unused to being in a gathering where they didn't know most people. But Hannah's parents made a point of sitting with them during dinner, and by the time speeches began, they seemed more at ease. Oliver's best man speech was heartfelt and funny, full of stories about our friendship and subtle acknowledgments of the journey that had brought me to this day. Hannah's sister gave a toast that had everyone alternately laughing and wiping away tears. Throughout the venue, I had arranged to display some of my artwork, pieces that told the story of my journey from isolation to connection, from exclusion to belonging. As the evening progressed, I noticed my parents standing in front of one particularly significant piece, the same one Hannah had been studying when we first met. "Your work has evolved," my father said when I joined them. Not effusive praise, but sincere acknowledgement. From him, it felt monumental. "Thank you," I said. "It reflects where I've been and where I'm going." My mother touched my arm lightly. "Maxwell, She started, then seemed to reconsider her words. "It's a lovely wedding. Hannah is wonderful." Again, not an apology or a dramatic reconciliation, but a small step towards seeing me as I was, not as they had decided I should be. The evening continued with dancing, cake cutting, and all the traditional elements of a wedding celebration. Throughout it all, Hannah and I remained connected, holding hands, exchanging glances, grounding each other in the present moment rather than past hurts or future anxieties. As the night wound down, Andrea found me again. "I just got a text from Lawrence," she said, showing me her phone. The message read simply, "Tell Maxwell congratulations." It was beautiful. "We should talk soon." I stared at those words, not quite believing them. After years of dismissal and exclusion, this small acknowledgement felt significant, not because I needed their approval anymore, but because it suggested the possibility of change. The wedding ended with Hannah and I dancing alone in the center of the garden, surrounded by our friends holding small lanterns that illuminated the space with warm, gentle light. As we moved together under the stars, I felt a sense of completion, not because my family story had been neatly resolved, but because I had finally, fully claimed my own narrative. Later that night, After we'd returned to our hotel room, I checked my phone one last time and found a notification that Victoria had tagged me in a social media post. With trepidation, I opened it to find a distant photo of Hannah and me during the ceremony, clearly taken from the back of the garden. The caption read, "My little brother got married today. It was unexpected and beautiful. I have some thinking to do." Hannah read it over my shoulder. "What do you make of that?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. I think it might be the first time she's seen me as a person separate from her expectations. "I don't know where it leads, but it's something. Something is a start," Hannah said, taking my hand. "But remember, we get to decide what relationships are healthy enough to include in our lives going forward." I nodded, setting the phone aside and turning toward my wife. My family by choice, not chance. Whatever happened with my siblings, I knew now that I was whole on my own terms. Hannah and I spent 2 weeks in New Zealand for our honeymoon, deliberately disconnecting from phones, social media, and the complications of family dynamics. We hiked through landscapes so beautiful they seemed unreal, slept under stars brighter than any I'd seen before, and began the work of being married, of being partners in the truest sense of the word. When we returned home, tanned and happy, reality was waiting in the form of dozens of messages from family members. I sat on our couch with Hannah, steeling myself as I scrolled through them. The first surprise was a voicemail from Victoria. "Maxwell, it's your sister. I've been thinking a lot since your wedding. I'd like to talk, if you're willing. Just the two of us. Call me when you get back." There was no demand in her voice, none of the clinical certainty that had characterized our interactions for years. She sounded almost hesitant. Isabella had sent an email, predictably longer and more structured than Victoria's message, but with a similarly unexpected tone. "While I stand by the logistical necessities that informed our wedding guest decisions," she wrote, "I can acknowledge that the cumulative effect of those decisions may have conveyed a message we did not intend. If you're amenable, I would appreciate the opportunity to discuss this in person." Lawrence had taken a different approach, sending a text that read simply, "Your wedding made me realize some things. Coffee sometime?" My treat. My parents had called several times, each message a little less formal than the last, ending with my mother saying, "We're proud of you, Maxwell. The wedding was beautiful. Hannah is lovely. We hope to see you both soon." I looked at Hannah, overwhelmed by the flood of communication. "What do you think this means?" She considered for a moment. "I think seeing you happy, confident, and surrounded by people who genuinely celebrate you might have cracked something open for them. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" I thought about it for several days before deciding to respond. I would meet with each sibling individually, on neutral ground, with clear time boundaries. I would listen, but I would also speak my truth without the fear of rejection that had silenced me for so long. Victoria suggested meeting at a quiet cafe near her hospital. When I arrived, she was already there, fingers tapping nervously on her coffee cup. She'd lost weight since the wedding, and there were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. I nodded, waiting. This conversation wouldn't work if I filled the silences as I always had before. After a moment, Victoria sighed. "I've been in therapy," she said, the admission clearly difficult for her. "Thomas and I were having problems. The therapist suggested I might have some issues with control and empathy." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Victoria, acknowledging a personal flaw? This was unprecedented. Seeing you at your wedding," she continued, "so clearly in your element, with people who obviously adore you, it made me realize I don't have that. I have accomplishments and status, but not genuine connection. And I started wondering if the way I've treated you, if that's part of why." It wasn't a full apology, but from Victoria, it was revolutionary. We talked for nearly 2 hours, more openly than we ever had before. She asked about my art, really asked, and actually listened to my answers. When I described how her wedding exclusion had felt, she didn't defend or deflect but simply said, I can see why that hurt you deeply. When we parted, she hugged me, not the brief, formal embrace of obligation, but a real hug. I'd like to try being actual siblings, she said. If you're willing. Isabella suggested meeting at a park, which surprised me. She usually preferred controlled environments like restaurants or offices. We walked along a path beside a small lake, the setting making it easier somehow to have a difficult conversation. I've always defined myself by achievements, she said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. Measurable, external validation. I think we all did except you. You chose a different path, and I think part of me resented that freedom. Freedom? I echoed, surprised. I never felt free. I felt like the family disappointment. Isabella stopped walking, turning to face me. You were never a disappointment, Maxwell. You were a reminder of a road not taken. Every time you pursued your passion despite family pressure, every time you chose authenticity over conformity, it highlighted the compromises the rest of us made without questioning. We sat on a bench overlooking the water, and for the first time, Isabella told me about the parts of her life I never saw, the constant pressure to maintain appearances, the 60-hour work weeks that were destroying her marriage, the panic attacks she hid from everyone. I'm not justifying how we treated you, she said. I'm just trying to explain that it wasn't because you weren't good enough. If anything, it was because you were braver than the rest of us. Lawrence suggested meeting at a driving range, of all places. I hadn't played golf since forced family outings as a teenager, but there was something therapeutic about whacking balls into the distance while having difficult conversations. I followed Dad's blueprint without questioning it, Lawrence admitted, his swing more aggressive than technically sound. Take over the family business, marry the right kind of woman, live in the right neighborhood. I never asked myself if it was what I wanted. I lined up my shot, remembering all the times Lawrence had mocked my poor golf form during those family outings. And was it what you wanted? He paused, club mid-swing. Some of it. But the cost has been higher than I expected. Rebecca and I barely talk anymore. We're like roommates managing a shared social calendar. He completed his swing, sending the ball slicing awkwardly to the right. I envied you and Hannah at the wedding. The way you looked at each other. Like you were actually choosing each other, not just fulfilling a role. Each of these conversations felt like stepping into alternate universes where my siblings were actual human beings with insecurities and regrets, not the perfect, united front they'd always presented. None offered the neat, complete apologies you see in movies, but all acknowledged, in their own ways, that the family dynamic had been broken, and that I hadn't been the one who broke it. My parents took longer to reach out again, but eventually invited Hannah and me to dinner at a restaurant, neutral territory, less loaded than their home with its weight of memories. The conversation was stilted at first, years of patterns hard to break in a single evening. But as the night progressed, small moments of genuine connection emerged. My father asked thoughtful questions about my recent commission for a corporate headquarters. My mother mentioned she had looked up Hannah's illustration work online and found it charming and quite clever. Small steps, but in a new direction. The real breakthrough came about 3 months after our wedding. My mother called to tell me that she and my father had started seeing a family therapist. We want to understand, she said, her voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. We don't want to lose you again. Over the following year, we engaged in a careful, deliberate process of rebuilding relationships on new foundations. Sometimes this meant family therapy sessions where old hurts were excavated and examined. Sometimes it meant simple, ordinary interactions, dinners where everyone got equal time to speak, celebrations where everyone's achievements were acknowledged, boundaries that were respected rather than dismissed. Victoria's marriage ultimately ended, a painful process that paradoxically opened her to greater empathy. Isabella scaled back her work hours and began reconnecting with her husband. Lawrence started pursuing photography as a hobby, something he'd been interested in as a teenager before being steered toward practical pursuits. Hannah observed these changes with cautious optimism. They're trying, she acknowledged. But I'm still watching to make sure they don't fall back into old patterns with you. Our first holiday gathering after the wedding was a test of the new family dynamic. Hosted at our apartment rather than my parents' house, the physical shift of location seemed to help disrupt established roles. Victoria brought her new boyfriend, a music teacher with a gentle manner completely unlike Thomas's corporate intensity. Isabella and Alexander held hands throughout the evening, something I couldn't remember seeing before. Lawrence showed us his photography portfolio, revealing a talent none of us had known he possessed. There were still moments of tension, old habits that slipped through. But now, when my mother began to interrupt me, my father gently redirected her. When Lawrence made a slightly dismissive comment about artistic types, Victoria surprisingly called him out on it. As we prepared to toast the new year, my father stood, glass in hand. "To new beginnings," he said, looking directly at me. "And to long overdue apologies. Maxwell, your mother and I haven't been the parents you deserved. We're trying to do better now." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Real life rarely provides those. There were still difficult conversations, misunderstandings, and moments when old wounds reopened. But there was also genuine effort, increasing awareness, and slow, steady healing. On our first anniversary, Hannah and I held a small gathering at the same sculpture garden where we'd been married. My entire family attended, not as an obligation but as genuine participants in our celebration. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing with Hannah, watching my siblings laughing together near one of my sculptures. "Did you ever imagine this?" Hannah asked, squeezing my hand. I shook my head. "Never. But I'm grateful for it. You know what made it possible, don't you?" she said. "You standing firm. You breaking the pattern. You showing them there was another way to be a family." I thought about the long, difficult journey from exclusion to this moment, not perfect unity, but authentic connection. I thought about how the hardest decision I'd ever made, not inviting my siblings to my wedding, had ultimately created the possibility of genuine relationship. "I just wanted to be seen," I said simply. "Really seen." Hannah leaned her head against my shoulder. "You are now. By all of us." Family is complicated, messy, and sometimes painful. But it can also change, grow, and heal when we have the courage to set boundaries, speak our truths, and remain open to new possibilities. My journey taught me that sometimes the most loving thing we can do, for ourselves and for those who have hurt us, is to break the patterns that keep us all trapped in roles that no longer serve us. Has your family ever expected you to accept treatment you wouldn't tolerate from anyone else? Have you ever had to make a difficult decision about family boundaries? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose their own happiness. Thank you for being part of this community that values authentic connection and healing. I wish you courage on your own journey of setting boundaries and building the family, blood or chosen, that truly sees and celebrates you.